Okay, so I need to dial it down a bit because my voice is a little bit, yeah, it's not great quality, but what can you do?
Europe, summer 1941.
Europe, summer 1941. His accent is actually so sick. This is basically why I like this channel so much. Yeah, it's called Eastery if you want to watch it yourself without me pausing. Yeah, 1941.
Germany had secured most of Central and Western Europe, with only great...
Oh yeah, so this is 1941. This is mainly just about Germany and Soviet Union war. After what it might show Operation Barbarossa. But basically, the Battle of France has lost. Denmark has lost. Pretty sure this country, Sweden, is lost, I think. Really only Britain exists, is not under German occupation. And Switzerland as well. Switzerland is not under German occupation. Spain aren't in it. Ireland, not really. They're neutral. I think Sweden actually might be neutral. But yeah. Let's carry on. So this is Soviet Union stuff. Germany, Soviet Union.
Great Britain remaining defiant on the islands. The only potential threat to Germany in Europe was its former ally, the Soviet Union.
Okay, so it's up to this point in 1941, as you know, 1939 World War II started. I'm going to stop pausing, I promise. But 1939, Soviet Union and Germany had a pact so that they wouldn't invade each other. So Germany is actually mostly focused on the western side, with France, Britain, and these countries, Denmark. What is this country? Yeah. So let's go.
In order to break the stalemate with Britain and make Germany's strategic position indisputable, Hitler decided to cripple the military capabilities of the Soviet Union and seize its natural resources. Germany planned to achieve this goal by capturing most of the European part of the Soviet Union.
That's the Arkhangelsk-Astrakhan line. So basically, Germany didn't want to take all of Russia, just the best parts, because it's just too big to take over the whole of Russia. And it's just not economically viable or logistically possible to have so many German soldiers across the whole of Russia. So just take the best parts, so they can carry on waging war at the blitz speed.
Before the onset of winter 1941. The main attack would take place in the center and be directed towards Moscow, with auxiliary attacks in the north and south. By the middle of June 1941, the Germans had almost completed the preparations and the invasion was about to begin. Meanwhile, the Soviet forces were unaware of what was coming and were ill-prepared to resist the German invasion. First, we'll look at the southern sector. The Soviets had deployed their strongest units in the south, having 1,200,000 men between the Pripyat marches and the Black Sea. They were to be confronted by the Army Group South that was of roughly the same strength. The first objective of the Axis troops was securing the western Ukraine.
Okay, so I might make a bit things a bit nicer to watch.
On June 22nd, the invasion began.
So basically, Germany just invaded without, and Soviets were completely unaware. They were not expecting. Well, a lot of people were, but Stalin at the time just dismissed all claims that Germany are going to invade, and guess what they do?
The Soviets immediately gathered their armed forces and met the German spearhead with a massive counterattack in the area of Dubno and Brody.
So if we can see, Dubno, this must be the Battle of Brody. It was a tank battle between the 1st Panzer Group, 3rd Army Corps, and that number Army Corps motorized, 5 mechanized corps, so 5th, 6th Army, the triangle formed. Battle of Dubno, Lutsk, and Brody between 23rd and 30th of June 1941. These are the belligerents, 750 tanks, only 750 tanks. So the Russians had way more tanks, 3,500 tanks, 800 tanks lost, only 200 tanks lost. Yeah?
Due to
Okay, cut off, but I'll fix that, don't worry. Is everything working? Yep. Okay, so watch this, yes. They lost 3,500 tanks. There's quite a lot of tanks actually. Pretty unfortunate. But yeah. Heavy losses. It's probably bad. Let's just carry on.
The Soviets immediately gathered their armed forces and met the German spearhead with a massive counterattack in the area of Dubno and Brody. But due to the lack of combat readiness of the units
they were caught completely off guard.
Involved, it failed.
So I'm just going to move you a little bit up.
And the Soviets lost most of their tanks.
So they lost this battle, even though they had way more tanks. Why is there no people? Oh, it was a mechanized fight. Oh.
The German advance continued, and this created a threat of
I'm very upset about the
encirclement to the Soviet troops in the south, and they had to be withdrawn from the exposed position. After the main attack had tied down the Soviet reserves, the Axis...
Oh yeah, there's an Italian thing. I've got a random. This is not really tied, but it is. Basically, before the onset of World War II, and before Hitler and stuff, Italians were the first people to be fascist, to have a fascist dictator. And Hitler was very much a fan of the Italian fascist dictator, Benito Mussolini. And basically, he was the first one, and he thought Hitler in the beginning was a silly old clown or something like that. But obviously, it turned out that Germany was much better at Italy and military combat and stuff. So, but Mussolini, even though the Italians were very not as good as war in Germany, he still requested that Italian soldiers should be on the eastern side fighting the Soviet Union. So yeah, just random fact. That's why there's an Italian division there. I can't really see what it is. Yeah.
Forces in Romania joined the offensive. The main spearhead now made a dash towards the east. Forces in Romania joined the offensive. Had tied down the Soviet reserves. The Axis forces in Romania joined the offensive. The main spearhead now made a dash towards the east, and this made Soviet command think that the main German effort was directed towards Kiev. However, the Germans had stuck to their original plan and...
So this is still in Ukraine, by the way. This is not mainland Russia. So Kiev is the capital city of Ukraine.
Turned south. When the Soviets realized the German intentions, it was already too late to withdraw their forces, and the Germans encircled and destroyed many of the Soviet formations.
Yeah, that's peak. That is absolutely peak. That's we're going to see how many prisoners of war that
near
is.
The town of Uman. The Soviets encircled and destroyed many of the Soviet formations near the town of Uman.
So you can see encirclement of Uman. Yeah, how you spell it? Yeah, Battle of Uman. It was that was a peak. That was peak. Oh no, it was Hungarian, not Italian. Sorry. My bad. They're right. I think later in the war then there was Italian things, but yeah, that's my bad. That was Hungary. Right bank Ukraine. See, killed or wounded. Only 20,000 casualties, whereas they're on a magnitude of 200,000, which is 10 times worse. So you can tell that Soviet military power was not, good. 6th Army, 17th Army. Ooh, this is very interesting. 6th Army. 17th Army, 1st Panzer Group. Also, they did not have, 600 tanks. The thing is, they were nearly equal strength. It's just that Germany was way more ready for war. Yeah.
The Soviets now abandoned western Ukraine and retreated to the eastern bank of the river Dnieper. The Soviets
Did you see that? 103,000 prisoners of war. Is that equal? Yeah, literally killed or wounded, captured 103,000. That's peak.
now abandoned western Ukraine and retreated to the eastern bank of the river Dnieper. They deployed the
You see, Odessa encircled, that's peak, and it's held by Romanian flanks. That is definitely Romania, right? Am I just getting all these countries wrong? Yeah, Romania. Romanian's not flanks, Romanian divisions.
first wave of freshly mobilized troops to establish a strong defense on the river
60,000.
line and also cling to the port of Odessa. At the same time, operations were being carried out in the north, where 1.5 million German soldiers from army groups north and center were facing 1 million Soviet soldiers. In the beginning of the invasion, the army group center
122,000. 1,022,000. That's a million. They're 500,000. There's no way they're going to be able to hold that. But we'll
was
see.
to encircle Soviet forces at the border and then advance towards Smolensk and Moscow. Meanwhile, Army Group North was to advance directly towards Leningrad, threatening to trap the Soviet forces between them and the sea. On June 22nd, the Germans attacked. The Soviet Western Front was deployed forward, and during the first days of the war, the German forces encircled most of its formations near the towns of Bialystok and Minsk.
Can you see how far back? That is a peak. That's yeah. We'll see.
In the Baltics, the Soviet counterattacks were defeated in the Battle of Raseiniai, and then they attempted to pull back and establish a defensive line on Daugava River. But the Germans reached the river before them and pushed onwards, threatening on Daugava River. But the Germans attempted to Baltics, most of
you see back here, they got encircled.
Formations near the towns of Bialystok and Minsk. In the Baltics, the Soviet counterattacks were defeated in the Battle of Raseiniai, and then they
Battle of Raseiniai. Battle of Raseiniai. Was it Raseiniai? Here we go. A large tank battle that took place in the early stages of Operation Barbarossa. Oh yeah, this whole thing is called Operation Barbarossa, by the way. And they had like tons of, they basically used like all their resources in doing this. That's how Germany is moving so far, so quickly into Russia. Strength. How so little tanks? 749 tanks there initially, and then they lost 704 tanks. Crewmen either killed or captured. 2/3 of the 6th. Oh damn, okay, they lost quite a lot. So they lost 2/3 of the 6th Panzer Division and 4th Panzer Group. A few cannons and trucks. The lone Soviet tank, a single KV-1, KV-2 tank advanced far behind the German lines after attacking a column of German trucks. The tank stopped on a road across soft ground and was engaged by 40 50mm anti-tank guns of the 6th Panzer Division anti-tank battalion. The tank was hit several times but fired back and disabled all 4 enemy AT guns. The heavy 88mm gun of the divisional anti-aircraft battalion was moved about 730 meters behind the lone Soviet tank but was knocked out by the tank before they managed to score a hit. During the night, German combat engineers tried to destroy the tank with satchel charges. Demolition, but failed, despite possibly damaging the vehicle's tracks. Early the morning of June 25th, German tanks fired on the KV from the nearby woodland, while another 88mm gun fired at the tank from its rear. While several shots fired, only 2 managed to penetrate the tank. German infantry then advanced towards the KV-1 tank and responded with machine gun fire against it. Eventually, the tank was knocked out by grenades thrown into the hatches. According to some accounts, the dead crew was recovered and buried by the approaching German soldiers' full military honours. While in another account, the crew escaped from their crippled tank during the night. So did they survive or not? The 6th Panzer Division Kampfgruppe commander, General Ernst Raus, described it as a KV-1 which was damaged by several shots with an 88mm anti-tank gun fired by the vehicle while distracted by light Panzer 35T tanks from Panzer Battalion 65. The crew were killed by a pioneer engineer who pushed grenades through 2 holes made by the AT gun while the turret began moving again. In 1965, the remains of the crew was exhumed and reburied in Soviet military cemetery in Raseiniai. According to Russian Military historian Massim Kolomeitz tank may have been recovered from the third. Yeah, it's impossible to identify the crew because their personal documents were lost after being buried in a wood north of Brasilia during the retreat, possibly by German troops. That's interesting. I didn't know that. That was a random thing I read on Wikipedia.
Attempted to pull back and establish a defensive line on Daugava River, but the Germans reached the river before them and pushed onwards, threatening the Soviet units in the west with encirclement. At the same time, army.
So yeah, that's how far back lines are, and that's where they are. 288 hours.
Group Center had finished encircling the Soviet western front, and its infantry units began to reduce the pockets while its armored forces advanced eastwards almost unopposed. The Soviets attempted to plug the gap by deploying most of their pre-war reserves to counter them, but it was not enough, and as the German offensive continued, their armor broke through the Soviet lines and trapped these units near Smolensk. By that time, the first wave of Soviet mobilization was complete, and the Soviets used these formations to block further German advance and attempted to free the encircled troops. However, the performance of these newly created units was lackluster, and they were unable to liberate the pocket. The Germans managed to close it up and eliminate it.
309,000.
The Germans had gained the upper hand in the central part of the front, and now they were faced with two options. They could continue the push towards Moscow immediately, or secure the flanks of Army Group Center first, and then continue the offensive eastwards.
Which one would you do? So those are the options
Faced
again.
with two options. They could continue the push towards Moscow immediately, or secure the flanks of Army Group Center first, and then
go to
continue
Moscow.
the offensive eastwards.
What would you do? Put it in the comments. Yeah, okay, don't do that. That's cringe.
They decided
Actually, do it
to
anyway.
do the latter, and the armored formations of Army Group Center were sent to aid neighboring army groups.
So they're just basically going to secure the flanks. I mean, they don't really need to. They could have just carried on advancing, just in case of a Russian counterattack. And they get encircled.
During this time, battles had been raging in the north, where Army Group North had failed to pull out large encirclements, and their progress was slowed down by the Soviet counterattacks and bad infrastructure. Nevertheless, they were making slow but steady progress, and after securing their left flank, they reached the approaches to Leningrad. When the help from Army Group Center arrived, they were able to perform the final push and cut off the land-based communications to the city.
This is probably one of the worst atrocities. A lot of atrocities happened during World War II, but this encirclement of Leningrad was actually like, how many days? 932 days, I think. This might just be a guess. So since then, and there's actual people. It's not just like, what do you call it? Like, it's not just like people fighting, people actually like proper start. The siege began 8th September. So this is 8th September, 2nd to 8th September. When the Wehrmacht severed the last road to the city, although Soviet forces managed to open a narrow land corridor to the city, 1943, the Red Army did not lift the siege until 27th of January. 872 days after it began, the blockade became one of the longest and most destructive sieges in history, and possibly the costliest casualty survived. Some historians classify it as a genocide. Yeah. So Germany, Finland, and Italy. I told you there was Italy. Even though they're all the way in the west. But yeah. Initial strength 642,000 during the siege. This is Soviet civilians. 642,000 during the siege, so as in like during the blockade, and 400,000 at evacuations. So that's more than 1 million people died. How many population in Leningrad at the time? Bro, it was mad.
City. Further north, Finland had entered the war against the Soviet Union on June 25th, and the Finnish troops took advantage of the Soviet defeats by taking back the lands lost in the Winter War. After that, they established
Oh yeah, there was a war previously with Finland, where Finland had to accept the things that Russia said, and they lost tons of land. But now, Russia's definitely in a trouble, so they just took advantage of it and got the land back. Yeah, I mean, he already said that, I'm just saying that again.
Forward defensive positions between the lakes. Even further north, the Finnish and German troops attempted to capture the Soviet port city of Murmansk and cut the Murmansk railway in order to sever the Allied supply route to the Soviet Union. However, their attacks became bogged down in the rough terrain short of their objectives. The front became static. Meanwhile, the other armored units of the Army Group Center were sent to help Army Group South. The Soviets had anticipated that the Germans would continue their attack towards Moscow.
That's peak. I don't care, that's peak. How are they getting encircled so bad?
South. The Soviets had anticipated
That's not even natural. They should have removed troops.
that the Germans would continue their attack towards Moscow and concentrated their troops on this direction, which allowed the German armored formations to push back the weaker Soviet units on their southern flank. The German advance southwards forced the Soviets to abandon their forward positions in the Pripyat marshes to shorten their line. In Ukraine, the Soviet troops were occupying a strong defensive position with their flanks resting on the Dnieper River in the west and south and the marshes in the north. Yet the panzers from Army Group Center were bypassing the marshes from the east and advanced into the Soviet rear. The Soviets thought that the German spearhead was overextended and could be contained. However, unbeknownst to them, the armored formations of the Army Group South had secretly crossed the Dnieper from the south into the armored formations of extended and advanced into the
south. That's very clear. If you just go a little bit back.
And their forward positions in the Pripyat marshes to shorten their line. In Ukraine, the Soviet troops were occupying a strong defensive position with their flanks resting on the Dnieper River in the west and south and the marshes in the north. Yet the panzers from Army Group Center were bypassing the marshes from the east and advanced into the Soviet rear. The Soviets thought that the German spearhead was overextended.
Overextended. So overextended means that they've gone too far, as it cannot be supported by like food and stuff. So they can't get like resupplies, and they've just gone way too far. And also a similar thing happened in the Battle of France, where they thought that the tanks should have stopped and waited for like resupply, but they didn't, and they were caught off guard, and that's how like France lost. I'm laughing, but it's actually not laughing at it. But that's how they lost like tons of their. Literally, while they were preparing their tanks and setting up like their divisions of tanks and stuff, while people were like tinkering and doing tank stuff, they were just blown to bits. Well, not blown to bits, but then killed. Well, they didn't even have a chance. So yeah. So I think what Russia thought that they would slow down a little bit, or they could perform an encirclement of their own, and they've extended too much. However, as you're going to see, that's not the case.
However, unbeknownst to them, the armored formations of the Army Group South.
See, they can't. These are the black ones, the XXX. Well, I can't really see what it says. These are armored troops, so like tanks and yeah.
Had secretly crossed the Dnieper from the south into a German breachhead and now broke through towards north to link up with the spearhead. As the groups met, most of the Soviet units in the central Ukraine became encircled.
Has more than 500,000 troops just gone, just lost.
750,000 men were trapped in the pocket. When the pocket had been liquidated, the Soviet forces in Ukraine had been severely weakened.
I like how Odessa, they're still alive, only held by Romanian soldiers. They still had, and the front lines like gone here. Well, actually, no, they still have Sevastopol, but yeah. Odessa.
After these operations, the flanks of Army Group Center were secure, but now the Germans didn't have enough time to reach the objectives set in the beginning of the campaign, and they decided to go for more limited goals. In order to reach them, they began a full-scale attack along the whole front. In the south, the Soviet resistance had been crippled with the recent encirclement, and this allowed.
As in, they had lost just more than 500,000 men in that thing. So obviously they're not going to be strong enough to. That's a lot, you know, more than 500,000 men.
The Germans to carry out another encirclement.
This is peak. Is it actually peak? Surely they should just know not to get
trapping part of the Soviet forces on the coast of the Black Sea. Then they pushed onwards and established their control over the resource-rich areas of the eastern Ukraine and conquered the Crimean Peninsula, with Soviets abandoning Odessa but clinging on to the port of Sevastopol. At the same time, the German forces were pursuing their objectives in the north. Their goal was to sever the remaining supply route to Leningrad and link up with the Finnish forces. The initial advance was successful and reached its first goal by cutting the railway line supplying the city. The main German effort was in the center. All this time the Soviets had anticipated an attack on Moscow and had deployed 1,250,000 mobilized troops to the sector. During the German operations on the flanks, they had even somewhat managed to push Army Group Center back to improve their defensive perimeter, but by the end of September, the German armor had finally returned to the center and
yeah, it's not looking great.
proceeded to carry out a new attack. Once again, near the towns of Vyazma and Bryansk,
Guess what? Another
Soviet
encirclement.
troops were encircled, and this resulted in halving the Soviets'
Again, 663,000. So they had 1 million, and then now they just get literally halved the whole army size. Yeah.
and proceeded to carry out a new attack. Once again,
Everything's still working good.
near the towns of Vyazma and Bryansk, the
I need to know this. Battle of Yamatsk. Is that what it's called? It's not Yamatsk. What was it?
carry out a new attack.
Oh, Myanmar. Oh, Bryansk. 600,000 captured. I know Zhukov. Mikhail Kalashnikov, that's the gun, isn't it? Was a senior sergeant serving on the T-34 with the 24th Tank Regiment. 12th Tank Division or 8th Mechanized Corps stations 3, 31 KV-1 and 10 T-34 tanks were retreating, with the regiment soon to become part of the 159th. He was wounded during the battle but made it to hospital on foot, where he received medical attention. This was not Kalashnikov's first battle, as he had also participated in the Battle of Brody. That's the one in the very beginning of the war, when Germany started invading. We did that, isn't it? Yeah. Where his division was on the 8th Mechanized Corps that encountered the German 16th Panzer Division in the battle around Le Choux. While recovering from his injuries, the Kalashnikov was experiencing flashback to the raid and became obsessed with creating a submachine gun that would drive the Germans from his homeland. And that's when he made the AK-47. Nice. Great.
Once again, near the towns of Vyazma and Bryansk,
Oh snap, there's another encirclement.
the Soviet troops were encircled, and this resulted in halving the Soviet strength on the front.
I don't know if this is obvious, but when you're encircled, the reason why it's so bad is because you don't have any resupply. So you're not getting supplied with guns, food, and stuff. So that's why you don't want to be encircled. You'd rather not be encircled than move back. But sometimes they go so quickly, especially with tanks and stuff, that the tanks overrun the people retreating, if that makes sense. So you're encircled.
After reducing the pockets, the Germans closed their distance to Moscow. Then they attempted to encircle Moscow with a two-pronged attack, but by that time the long advance had exhausted their offensive capabilities and the weather had become severely cold. The Soviets managed to halt their advance, and although they didn't have large superiority in numbers, the Soviet proficiency in winter combat allowed them to carry.
The Russians are good at fighting in winter, basically. So what they wanted to do was try to encircle it, but winter came. And when winter comes, it's not good for the other people trying to fight Russia, as history says quite a lot of times.
Carry out a counterattack. The Germans were forced to abandon their vulnerable forward positions on the flanks and pulled back in order to shorten the front line. During the retreat, they had to abandon some of their heavy equipment. At the
So now Soviet Union is fighting back.
same time, the German attempt to cut off Leningrad had also failed, and they had to retreat to their starting positions, and the supply line to Leningrad was restored. In the south, the German advance was also checked by the Soviets, forcing the Germans to abandon their forward positions in Rostov. The first year of the war was over. The Soviets had stopped the Germans far from their initial goals, but at the great cost to their own military capabilities. The Red Army had been decimated, and it would take a year or more to fully rebuild and re-equip the army. The Germans wanted to use this window of opportunity and were sending most of their available forces to the Eastern Front to deliver a knockout punch in the following year. 1942 would be the decisive year of the war.
1942. Well, I'm gonna watch it. But... Oops. Am I clicking stuff? 19.